Hello everybody and welcome to this 3 Colours Up with myself, John. In this one we're going to be tackling the mighty Jagdtiger for Flames of War. This is a vehicle I've been looking forward to coming out in plastic for a long time, and now that it's finally here I get to paint one. So we're going to be doing a traditional sort of 3-tone camouflage on this Jagdtiger. We have some decals in there, some pigment work. We have a bit of airbrushing in there, but don't feel intimidated if you've never airbrushed before. It's pretty straightforward, don't worry about it, always give it a try. If you're nervous, borrow someone's airbrush and ruin it for them instead. But this was an absolute joy to paint. I really enjoyed this one and I hope you guys do as well. And if you want any tank gibberish, there's not much in this video, I will say that. However, I do absolutely think Jagdtiger is the most silly, impressive vehicle I've ever had the privilege of standing next to. I went to the one in Bovington, stood next to that and was like, this is insane. Like, why is this thing here? And it's nice to have it in plastic at Flames of War scale. So without further ado, let's get down to the table and let's paint it. Alright, let's get started with our Jagdtiger, and the first thing I want to talk about is the priming. So we've primed in Chaos Black and then oversprayed with Citadel Grey Sear. You'll also see during the build process I've drilled out the end of the gun barrel because this is a 128. This is not something that you can get away with just having a blank end on this gun. It just looks better that way. So I usually do this now. I've got into the force of habit of overspraying most of my Flames of War scale vehicles. Starting with black and then working up into grey. I kind of do that just because if I put my base coats down thin enough, it's actually going to give me a little bit of variation and just make things look a little more interesting. I try to do this because I don't want to compromise on the amount of time I'm spending painting. I want to get the model done. So what we're going to be moving to first is our base coats. Our first base coat is our camouflage beige. This is our Vallejo colour. And we're going to be airbrushing that down now. We're going to be doing the airbrush for the base coats, or for the base coat and the camouflage, because when you're production lining these, they come in a box of 3. You could get these done in an evening if you have a little bit of airbrush experience. It's not necessary, and there's plenty of camouflage patterns out there that you can use that you don't require an airbrush for. So let's fire our airbrush up and make sure it's working okay, which it is. And let's get applying our beige. We can go quite light on this as well if you really want to help accentuate that pre-shading. Not that there's a lot of it, but you know, it is there. Alright, now we have our base coat down and dry. It's maybe a little patchy in places, but I'm not too worried about that. What it has allowed me to do is retain a little bit of that deeper shading in some of the panel lines. So we do get a little bit of a sense of weight with the model. Now we're going to start on to our camouflage. And our camouflage is going to be the typical German 3-tone that you sort of typically see mid to late war period. I know some Jagdtigers were painted in that and some weren't. The box art for these gives you a 2-tone scheme with this basically into green, but I wanted to show a 3-tone being done and being airbrushed. So the first colour we're going to be putting down is Vallejo Chocolate Brown. We have it thinned through our airbrush roughly, quite heavily actually, about 3:1. So I'm going to make sure that it still works on my palette here. And you can see that just how thin that actually is. So we're going to start applying it in blotchy patterns all over the vehicle, and yeah, we'll just see what happens. So let's just crack on. At this point, we now have all our brown camouflage down, so we can have a look around the vehicle and see what we think. The pattern's a little unusual, of course. It's a bit blockier than what I would usually go for, but you know what, it's going to work because remember, these things were camouflaged in the field when they were received by their regiments, so it's not going to be perfect, but don't worry about it. We're going to move on now and we're going to start to do our green, and our green is going to be Vallejo refractive green, and again through the airbrush like the brown. So I'm going to make sure it's working. Should be enough. And the plan is to sort of hug the brown sections, and then we can also use the green to narrow some of the brown down a little bit if we think part of it is just a little bit too big. So let's have a go and see what we can do. With our camouflage now down, we'll just have a look around the vehicle and show you what the pattern looks like from different angles. And I think we've managed to get the three-tone looking pretty decent. Now there is going to be more steps to the base colours after this, but we do need to apply some markings first. So if we're going to be doing any markings, we want to do it at this stage before we start distressing and fading any of our camouflage work, which I currently have down here at the corner of my palette. I have my 2 tactical numbers and my 2 Balkan crosses as well. So what they need to do is the number needs to be applied roughly here. I think, is it the number or the other way around? I think, is it the number at the top and the cross below? Yeah, I'm not too sure. We'll put the crosses on first anyway. So I'm just going to slide that transfer onto my knife, or not, it's just going to go onto my finger. That's fine. So we're going to place the cross low on the superstructure. Need to peel it off my finger. People keep telling me to stop using knives and, you know, do transfers better than that. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make you all cringe every time I start putting transfers onto models. So we want to just square that up. I think low with the number above looks fine. Seems understandable to me to do it that way. And then we'll put our number above. And we will position that. And I'm going to take a little bit of tissue paper, or kitchen roll in this case, and see if we can just remove a lot of the excess water from underneath, so that they settle down a bit quicker. That's kind of all right. Not exactly square, but it'll be fine. Then we'll do the other side real quick. Get it onto the knife. Place it low. A bit higher than that. Sort of sits, yeah, pretty much equal there. That's fine. And our number. Okay, same again with our tissue paper. Right, with those down, we're then going to take a little bit of decal softener. We're going to drop some of that onto my palette. Just a couple of drops, don't need any more than that. And then we're just going to take a brush and just lightly apply this over the transfers. And just dampen the area around them as well. And this is the decal softener from Green Stuff World as well, so just to let you know that. And what this is going to do is help settle the transfers down. It's going to soften the film that they're printed onto. It doesn't dissolve it, but it does soften it. And if you had any rough texture or anything like that on the miniature, that'll help conform it down. It sort of helps get rid of a few little air pockets if they're not just perfectly down. And why I do it on a model that is on a flat surface is because of the paint as well. Because paint will be, particularly when airbrushed, can be a little bit grainy. So this just helps conform it all down a little bit. And I think we're going to end up with a good result there. So we're going to let that settle for a while. And then when we come back, we can start fading and distressing our camouflage. So with the transfers down and settled with the decal softener, you can sort of see what I was talking about here. You can see maybe a little bit of a sheen that's sort of slightly rippled or textured. That's because the transfer film has now conformed to the surface of the paint. That leaves it a lot more tightly fitting to the rest of the model. So if we even matte varnished over this right now, you probably wouldn't be able to tell where that film is on the model. However, we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be working on fading this camouflage down a little bit. And we're going to be doing that by taking some of our camouflage beige and we're going to be dry brushing it over the whole model. So we're going to take some and put onto our palette here. And we've got a fairly large dry brush that we're going to use to do this. So make sure it's worked nice and light. And then we'll take the model, and what we're going to do is start dry brushing every surface of the miniature to try and highlight and fade in our camouflage. So doing circular motions with the brush over the flat areas will help highlight certain parts, but also help fade in our green and our brown. This is also a way that will help reduce the amount of overspray that's been visible on the model, but the overspray really isn't that big a deal to me, mostly because masking is fine, but in real life they weren't masked anyway, so the coloration would have changed a little bit. Now you can see what we're going for here. You can see on the superstructure that our green and our brown are starting to fade a little bit. They're not as vibrant as they are over here where they haven't received any dry brushing yet. So that's what the effect I'm going for is. It also gives us a bit more of a dusty sort of finish as well. So we're going to do that over the whole model, and then when that's done, we're going to look at shading down our armor. With our dry brushing step now done, we can have a look around and see how that has faded our camouflage in. Makes it all look pretty good. Now we're going to make it look a bit weird by spraying some gloss varnish, Citadel Ard Coat in this case. We're going to be doing this because we're going to be doing a wash step next, and we want to make sure that the wash will move around the model the way we want without tinting what we've already done. So let's get our airbrush ready. And let's just gloss varnish. With our gloss varnish now down, we can move on to our wash step, and it's going to be Agraxar shade over the whole model. So with the gloss varnish down, this is going to allow our wash to creep into all our panel lines and really sort of set things off, and it's going to look particularly good on our engine deck here. So let's just start, and you can see how the gloss varnish lets us move that wash around really easily and focus on those panel lines and those vents and stuff like that, and it's going to settle into those real nice. So again, this is another step where we just go over the whole model, and when we're done, we'll come back and see what we've got. With our wash now down and dry, we can have a look and see that it's matted the vehicle down a little bit in places, but has also given us just a little bit of extra shading in and around everywhere on the model, particularly on the top of the engine deck there. We've got our panel lines all looking pretty good. So yeah, our details coming back to us, it's looking quite solid. Now we're going to go through a bunch of base coating steps here, so we're not going to spend too much time on them. So on our tracks, we're going to go with Vallejo Dark Mud. This is the Panzer Aces range. From there, we're going to be using some contrast Black Templar. That's going to be on our tow cables. After that, we're going to use some Vallejo Oily Steel. We're going to use that for the machine gun up front. And I think after that, we have a couple of other colors here that I need to just pull out of the woodwork. We have some Panzer Aces New Wood. That's going to be for all our tools, anything that has wood content on it. So we have the gun cleaning rods and a couple of other bits and pieces like the spade and whatnot. That's going to go with that. Then we're going to take the Panzer Aces Dark Rust, and we're going to paint our exhausts. So we're going to go and do that range of base coating, and then when we come back, we'll look at shading it. With those base coating steps now down, the Jagdtiger is really starting to take shape here now. So we have plenty of detail going on. It's nice to have more than just that camouflage. We have a few standout colours in there, like the colour of the wood and the tow cables and stuff, and a bit of that dark rust on the spare track on either side. Everything contributes to making the vehicle stand out and really pop on the tabletop. So we were using oily steel earlier for the machine gun barrel here, and we're going to take another little bit of it because I want to do a bit of a nerdy detail here. So I'm just going to get some onto my brush real quick because it's still on my palette and still wet. The gun cleaning rods on the sides will have metal ends on each of them. So if you feel like doing it, you don't necessarily have to. If you feel like doing it, we can just add a little bit of that steel onto the ends of those rods. Because they screw together. That's how the gun cleaning kit works. These rods screw together and you put the brush on one end. So we can do that there and roughly make it an equal part on the other ends as well. And that just adds more, just a little bit more. So if you feel like doing it, and it's something I would say, you know, give it a try. If you're doing Jagdtigers, you've only got 3 in the box, add a little bit extra. So if you really feel like it, just to give a bit more sense of interest, just something to make the eye focus in on certain details of the miniature. And I think always doing the gun cleaning rods with those little metal ends is something that's easily achievable and just gives you that little extra pop. Basically that. So that looks good. We haven't touched the starter crank and we haven't touched the track holders either, because I don't necessarily think you would have those off the vehicle to paint them. And obviously I think this bit as well should probably have been painted in new wood, this bit on the back, because I believe that's the track block for the track jack, which is this piece down here, to set into the ground and put the jack on top of. But it's not the most major of details, and I'm happy with the way they are. So from here, we have a couple of minor steps to do now. We're going to take some more Black Templar, and we're going to coat the machine gun barrel with Black Templar. We've also done some Black Templar in the end of the gun barrel, just so that we have that extra bit of depth there. So a little bit of Black Templar here, and we're just going to coat our MG barrel. And what that's going to do is give us a dark metallic kind of finish to it. It might just only on the edges of the gun does it really sort of show up, but having it done is better than not. I've also taken some Black Templar into the areas where the periscopes are, so you can see here and up here on the top of the superstructure, and our little areas here, and the 2 facing rearward as well. Again, it's just adding something else to the model that really sets it apart from just a gaming piece and starts to make it look more like a believable paint job on a miniature like this. Now, we're done with the Black Templar. So we're going to move on to Vallejo model color German Camouflage Black Brown. And we're going to be doing this as a sponge to put a little bit of paint chipping onto the model. So we have that onto my palette, and then take a little piece of sponge. This is just sponge. I just gather up sponge from blister packs, that sort of thing. And maybe you can't see it on the palette, but that's all right. So we're going to dab it on the palette and remove a fair amount of it. And then on the miniature, we're just going to touch edges of plates, and particularly down around here, edges of the mud guards and stuff like that, just to give us a bit more visual interest again. So nothing too major. Same up on the top of the hull. Just a few knocks and scrapes. Particularly like to focus it on areas of high wear. So how do you designate what is a high wear area on a vehicle? Generally any flat surface, any horizontal flat surface where people will be walking across it, the engine decks are always a very good spot to be adding a little bit of paint, chipping and a bit of wear and tear, because you're always going to have people climbing over the vehicle for maintenance or for getting on board the vehicle or getting off the vehicle. So really, you're looking at areas where it would be natural for someone to stand or to climb. So I'll get a little bit more paint here onto the sponge. Make sure we're not doing too much. And it's just very lightly picking out those areas where we think people would be walking around and scraping paint. Because if you had infantry climbing over this vehicle, for example, and they're wearing the typical German jackboot, or even some of the later war suede boots, some of those have hobnails in the soles. So you are going to be damaging paint by doing that, because you're stepping over a vehicle with basically metal spikes in your boots. So it makes sense that the paint is going to not look as pristine as it currently does. So we're just going to be just picking out a few spots here and there. We're not going to go too heavy on it, particularly up here where our driver's position would be. It's a little bit too heavy on the front there, but that's all right. And then on the pike nose, on the very nose of the vehicle, just like that. I don't think we need any more than that. So we're going to keep it quite subtle for this model. Now, what do we do next? Well, what we're going to do next is return to our our Agrax Earthshade, and we're going to take all the pieces that we've just base coated and we're going to weather them down. We're going to shade them down. So this will be the next step, and then after that we're going to do maybe a little bit more metal work, I think. But we're going to do this now and start shading in all these locations. So when we come back, we'll look at a little bit more weathering and then some pigment powders. With our wash step now done, we can see just a little bit more definition on the likes of the gun cleaning rods, a little bit darker on the spare track and stuff there as well. So that's all looking good. It's all shaded in quite nicely. Now we're going to move on to the tracks. We're going to pay them a little bit more attention after putting the dark mud down. And we're going to be moving back to oily steel. And for this, we're going to be dry brushing it. So we're going to take a nice big dry brush here and just prep that on my palette. Make sure it's fine. And then we're just going to dry brush our track. And we're going to go quite heavy with it as well, because we want it to be quite heavy, because when we get to the pigments, or when we add pigments to this, we want it to still stand out. So I'm going to make sure that we have plenty of this silver on our tracks. And it's a relatively quick step, but it always adds just a little bit more to the vehicle. If you've decided not to do this, I would definitely recommend revisiting some of your models and just doing it, because you get just a little more definition and a little more quality off the model. You don't have to, but it always helps, because track will, under sustained use, track will tend to be quite silver. It will polish up when it's driving on firm, hard ground. It will polish the contact points that are on the ground. And a vehicle as heavy as a Jagdtiger, we're over 70 tons here. This thing is going to be really abusing its track. It's a very heavy vehicle. So just get in there and just go for it. Do as much or as little as we want. And if you really feel like it, you can touch the tow cables and stuff as well. But because there's not a lot of texture on them, I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. I think they're fine as they are at this scale. If you're working on something at 28mm, yeah, absolutely get in there and dry brush that up a little bit. Now we're going to move on to some pigments, and my pigment of choice in this one is going to be the good old-fashioned MIG Europe Dust, because it's one of the best dusty pigments around. I'm not sure if you can still get it or not, actually. It's probably more an AK product now. What we're going to be doing is applying it as a wash. So we're going to put some onto my palette here, move that to the side, dip my brush in some water, and we're going to start making a little bit of a sludge, a little bit of a thin-ish kind of wash here. And then it's going to be a case of, once we have that done, we're going to apply it liberally over our tracks and wheels. Something like so. We want to always make it as wet as possible. We want to have as much water as possible so that it seeps into everything. And what we can do as well, if we thin it a little bit further, or make it very, very thin, we can apply it to some of the surfaces on top of the vehicle, so along these mudguards, like that, and maybe take it up a little bit further than that, just right up to the mudguard's edge. Across the front. And what's nice about this is because we're applying it with water, we can always rub it back off or remove it without too much hassle. So we want to be quite heavy here. So actually, I think what I'm going to do is apply it quite liberally over most of our lower surfaces, most of our lower hull here. Let it build up around the details on the hull. And along the, mostly on the flat surfaces as well. So lower hull and upper flat surfaces of the vehicle too. So along our driver and co-driver hatches. And up on the top deck as well. Like so. And then we'll take a little bit more and thin it down a touch more and run it down the side. So what started off as just certain areas, I think we're just going to turn into most of the vehicle. But we're going to keep the heaviest application down along our wheels and tracks. We really want that to be much, much heavier than what we're applying further up the vehicle. Although we are going to go heavier over the engine deck. Like that. So we're going to get that done, let it dry, and then when we come back we'll see what our end result is. With our pigments dry, I went in and airbrushed a little bit of a matte varnish over the whole vehicle, and we now have our Jagdtiger complete and ready to hit the tabletop and destroy some stuff. So what have we got in the end? We have a subtly weathered matte finish, 3-tone camouflaged monster of a thing, and in general I think we have a pretty good solid result with not a lot of complex techniques, a contrast paint here and there, just a little bit of patience, and you're going to get a vehicle that looks like this. And I think anybody would be very happy to have this in their army. I certainly will whenever I get round to doing a German army at some point in the future, maybe by I don't know, 2030. I've now dated this video. If you're watching in 2030, I probably still don't have an army. So we have very simple techniques, a little bit of airbrushing, but guys, as I've always said, don't worry about airbrushing, just practice. Just give it a go and see how you feel, and practice makes perfect. Every time I lift the airbrush, I always tell you, base coats, priming, and eventually when you're feeling a bit more comfortable, start doing stuff like camouflage. And as you can see in the end result, particularly our further out shot, I really like that. We're getting a more sort of table eye view, and the vehicle just stands out. All those little details that we painted and just put a wash over all stand out all make this vehicle look what it has. It has this lovely impact. And I think if you have an army that's painted up to this kind of quality, which in reality, guys, isn't that much. Let's be honest here. There are guys out there that can do really super work. But if you're not able to devote the amount of time that you need to make something look absolutely incredible, you're going to be able to get something like this done in an afternoon or an evening if you're doing a bit of batch painting. And that's what I always like to say, you know, work with batches. Always do your production line painting using the same techniques, and the time will fly by and you'll actually start enjoying yourself, hopefully. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I've really enjoyed painting this one, and I hope that's come across. And until next time, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll have a chat with you down there. But until next time, take care, stay safe, and see you again very soon.